Here's a question designed to trick you. Where is Greece? Now it seems obvious. Too obvious. I'm showing it to you right now. It's where the country called Greece is. Big peninsula, smaller peninsula, bunch of islands, too easy. I even labeled it. But hold on a minute, that right there is the modern state, but there's also ancient Greece, and those things don't necessarily overlap. This is why you should never trust a rhetorical question. It's a ploy by Big Thesis designed to introduce a topic. However, today I am Big Thesis. It is me, and the point I'm making is that the defined geography of modern Greece skews our perception of ancient Greece, subconsciously omitting the parts which don't line up. Modern Greece is a mainland surrounded by islands, while the ancient Greek world is better understood as a circle of land surrounding the Aegean Sea, and that includes the east coast of this ginormous peninsula named Anatolia. The word in Greek simply means east, as it marks the place where the sun rises, and while it's indeed a bit to the right of the mythological center of the universe at Delphi, the Anatolian coast is not just an essential piece of the ancient Greek world, it's also where most of the cool stuff came from. Art, architecture, literature, philosophy, and more were pioneered on these eastern shores before being imported across the Aegean for latecomers like Athens to fiddle around with. Boom, Athens slander, I gotta get it where I can. So, what's so neat about this slice of land, and why did its place in Greek history get so muddled? Well, nothing to do but do some history. Now, Anatolia is a large place with over a dozen major regions and plenty of peoples calling it home over the centuries, but our story will focus in on three coastal areas, Aeolis, Ionia, and Thoris. Beyond being stacked adorably on top of each other like kids in a trench coat, these names tell us what kinds of Greeks lived there, because ancient Greeks didn't consider themselves one unified ethnicity, but grouped themselves mainly by dialect, and the three big ones were Aeolic, Ionic, and Doric. Pattern. Now, written records don't really tell us how Greeks first populated Anatolia. The best we get are post hoc founding myths concocted centuries afterwards. But if we compare those with the tribe's linguistic distribution and notice the cleanly mirrored placement across the Aegean, we can intuit a gradual migration of Greeks across the sea, starting possibly in the late Mycenaean era but picking up after the Bronze Age collapse, with the end result by the 700s BC being a constellation of Greek cities along the Anatolian coast. Aeolis and Ionia each had a 12-city dodecapolis, and Thoris rounded out the squad with a 6-city hexapolis. In contrast to the purpose-built colonies established in southern Italy during the Polis Age, these cities developed right alongside those of the mainland, arising slowly and organically, sometimes over top of pre-existing Bronze Age settlements. And that was the case with the Mycenaean-era citadel of Milawanda, abandoned in the Dark Ages and later repopulated during the migrations. In the 700s-500s, this city, known as Miletus or Miletos, had grown to become the premier polis of Ionia, of Anatolia, and possibly all of Greece. Miletus profited handsomely from trade with the seafaring Phoenicians and amassed a huge population to send out for its own colonies, founding as many as 90 all around the Black Sea and as far south as Egypt. The Milesians sent their people everywhere, but also brought the whole Mediterranean to them, to visit the great sanctuary of Apollo at Didyma just outside Miletus. Similar to sites like Delphi and Olympia, the sanctuary attracted votive gifts from all over, becoming an open-air showcase of art and craftsmanship from Greece, Phoenicia, Egypt, and Assyria. And those eastern works heavily influenced the development of Greek art. But also, down in the Nile River colony of Nafkratis, Greeks got an up-close view of monumental Egyptian statues, taking that inspiration for the immense scale and stylized figures of their own kudos statues back home. They also would have been awed by the enormity of Egyptian architecture, potentially accelerating Greece's evolution from wooden temples towards their iconic stone temples. And back in Ionia, the Ionic order, with its fancy scrolled columns and elegant running frieze, was pioneered at the great sanctuary of Hera at nearby Samos, and peaking slightly ahead of the 4 Greek wonders of the ancient world, 3 will be in Anatolia. These were big evolutions, but all this eastern contact shaped art and material culture on smaller and domestic scales as well, from textiles to roof tiles to pottery styles. The Greeks would take all these ideas in their own new directions as centuries unfolded, but most of the raw artistic inspiration, the spark, came from the east through Anatolia. But if the arts were a clear case of reception into innovation, something new and unique to Greece was emerging in literature. The eastern island of Chios was home to the legendary poet Homer, who probably took the sprawling oral tradition of epic poetry and stitched it into the stories we know as the Iliad and Odyssey. Right out the gate, infinity poetry points to the Ionians. They win. They simply win. But one island north and a century later, the Aeolic poets Alcaeus and Sappho of Lesbos were at the forefront of a new style called lyric poetry, where the poet speaks not as a faceless vessel for the muses, but as a defined individual with experiences, opinions, and, in Sappho's case, a to-do list. Then, around 600 BC, a new kind of thought took shape on the coast, not declarative like poetry, but inquisitive, as Thales of Miletus sought to understand the nature and origins of the world through natural phenomena rather than divine ones. His fields of study were what we'd today call science, mathematics, and astronomy, but the core process of questions, deductions, and reasoning that Thales pioneered would spread, grow, and take shape as philosophy. During this formative pre-Socratic period between Thales and when Socrates kicks down the door to ruin everyone's day, Ionia remains squarely at the forefront of philosophy, producing thinkers like Anaximander, Heraclitus, Pythagoras the geometry and triangles guy, and significantly many more. But the Ionians weren't done, as the underlying ideas of philosophy spread in new directions, and that quest for understanding took shape as two new fields, geography and history. Thales and Anaximander had pondered the full shape and size of the earth, then Hecataeus of Miletus did the work to fully catalog the known world in his Periodos Ys, the journey around the earth, starting from Gibraltar and Iberia and going clockwise around the Mediterranean to the north coast of Morocco. And last but likely most famous of all was Herodotus of Halicarnassus, whose book The Histories unified storytelling with geography to take the reader on a tour of the world across lands and through time. For all Herodotus' inaccuracies and outright nonsense, his skill was in stepping outside of his political and cultural perspective to present the most vivid picture of the ancient world yet seen, through a mostly objective viewpoint. Per his own words, the book is an inquiry, drawing a line back to the inquiries of Thales. Science, philosophy, and history are very different things now, but they sprang from a cohesive Ionian thought process. Now, the Eastern Greeks of Anatolia did not have a monopoly on culture, but similar to how we might think of Athens as the cultural beacon of the classical era, Anatolia, and Ionia in particular, were similarly the beacon, the center of gravity, in the Archaic age. These Greeks produced the most innovative artisans and most renowned poets of their day, and set the model for how to think deeply and reason across several developing fields. One lens to understand the cultural accomplishments of the later classical period is that the mainland finally caught up. I'm joking, a little bit, but like, only a little bit. But here's the problem. With all the above being true, why is this not the main narrative of the Archaic period? Why are the 7 to 500s typically treated as just the setup to the good stuff, and why do the Ionians and co get only a cursory recognition in all this? The reflex answer is to blame Athens for sucking all the air out of the room, but there's something more complicated going on here, because for all that Anatolia did in the Greek world, it didn't stay in the Greek world, and we learn about all this from our buddy Herodotus in the form of the Persian Wars. See, in 546 BC, the Greek-adjacent kingdom of Lydia, just a ways inland, got conquered by the big new power on the peninsula, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And by the end of the century, the whole Aegean coast was under the dominion of the great King Darius. Now, standard Persian procedure kept imperial rule relatively light and local culture intact, but the trade was Persia installing tyrants to govern the cities. In 499, a combination of general Ionian discontent and a local flashpoint in Miletus spread to a full-scale revolt. Fun in theory, painful in practice, and the end result was Persia violently reasserting its authority by destroying Miletus, razing the city, and enslaving whomever they didn't kill. One of the greatest Greek cities was in ruins, and Ionia got the unfortunate status of problem corner of the empire. All this, in turn, precipitates the Persian Wars against mainland Greece and the subsequent rise of the even more exploitative Athenian Empire. These are essential pillars of Hellenic history in which the Eastern Greeks are mere bit players subjugated by other people's empires, passing from Persian, Athenian, Persian again, until Alexander the Jumpscare flips the table and redraws the entire world. In the ensuing Hellenistic era and into the Age of Rome, Anatolia saw a spectacular re-emergence with magnificent cities like Pergamon and Ephesus, but two things had also changed. After Persia rolled in, there was always a bigger center of cultural gravity. Sardis, Athens, Alexandria, Rome, Constantinople, Athens again but modern this time, Ionia never again had the same prominence as in the Archaic period. But the second change is that Persia inadvertently initiated the classical period by severing Anatolia from the rest of the Aegean Greek world. So the fundamental idea of classical Greece, so focused on Athens and Sparta, exists in a kind of opposition to the East, and thus to Ionia. That era became the iconic chapter of ancient Greek history, yet it just so happens to be the one which excludes the Eastern Greeks the most. Frustrating, maybe, but once we notice that lens, we can see how it colors the rest of our cultural memory, which in turn becomes an opportunity to understand that history better. That's the job. So, here's a question designed to get you thinking. Where's Greece? Thank you for watching. I've been properly studying ancient Greek history for over 10 years now, and I only appreciated just how much was going on in Archaic era Anatolia like last week as I sat down to research this. Goes to show that even with lots of time and interest, framings of history are really dang hard to shake, but so worth it when you do. This is one of my new favorite places in ancient Greece, and it's been hiding this whole time. Of course, there are plenty more hidden corners of history to uncover, so I'll see you in the next video.